So I'd like to welcome everybody for being here today. It is such a beautiful day outside. It's tough to be coming inside, but is the speakers not on? Are you hearing me? Okay. Short welcome. In any case, thank you for coming. We've called this um, uh, it- our mini conference because we only intended to spend a couple of hours of your time this afternoon. So it is an end of life with dignity and meaning, as you hopefully will appreciate as we go on. This conference was really the idea of a colleague of ours, Dr. Robert Lederer, who was a pediatrician for many of the families in the Park Hill area and became aware of the end of life options and preparations and actually did a little presentation for us at our men's group, which we have. It's a group of men that meet a couple of times a month to talk about what's going on with our lives and in the rest of the world. We've had lots of help putting this together. I want to give credit to all the speakers that you'll hear about today have been part of helping us put this together. And we hope that the next 2 hours will provide some essential information for those of you who have some interest, but also some emotional support and guidance for dealing with these potentially overwhelming kinds of challenges. So let's go to the next slide. And I want to give you just a quick review of the program this afternoon. As you can see, we're going to start with, hopefully, with a discussion. Megan Lederer, who is on her way here, and we're going to move her to the end of our speakers just because she's running a little late. But she has a family story we wanted to share with all of you that sort of, we think, kind of sets the tone for what we're going to be talking about today. So instead of having Megan begin, I'm going to, in a minute, turn it over to my co-chair and good friend and colleague, Ben Green, for a few of his comments. But once we get started, we're going to begin talking about the legal and financial aspects. We'll move then to talking a little bit about palliative care and hospice, and then use of a death doula, which I had never heard that term before until about 2 months ago, and a little bit about options for disposition of remains. And then finally, we have a panel of 3 religious leaders who are going to talk a little bit. We're going to ask questions of them, and they're going to give us their answers. And then I think at that point, we'll have Megan, just before we begin to get into a discussion groups, we'll have her talk for a little bit. But following the speakers, the first hour, the second hour was really designed for you to ask questions of the speakers. So we'll probably divide up into 4 circles, or we may even use the tables if we've got enough room up there. I think we do. And then we'll have the speakers move around to the different tables every 15 minutes. So you don't have to get up and move. You can sit at that table for the last hour to the extent that you want to stay for the rest of the program. So again, thank you for coming this morning, and let me introduce my co-chair, Ben Green.
Mark, just to let you know, I'm going to use the mic here. Well, thank you all for coming. As I thought about coming to a conference like this, I realized that even up until a couple of years ago, I used to studiously avoid anything having to do with advanced age or mortality, you know. Talk about a Debbie Downer, you know. Makes me think of the words of the legendary baseball pitcher, Satchel Paige. Don't look back, something may be gaining on you. I do think it's a natural inclination for all of us to avoid things that are unpleasant, make us uncomfortable, but I think there's a cost for doing that. When I think about my psychotherapy patients, the ones that systematically avoid difficult issues, conflicts, things that make them feel afraid or ashamed, they're the ones that tend to stay stuck. They don't learn new coping strategies. They don't really enjoy much in the way of personal growth. And my own observations are reinforced by a lot of literature. One of the most convincing is the Harvard Study for Adult Development, which has now been going on for over 80 years. And they followed one aspect of the study. They followed a large group of individuals for 30 years, and they checked with them 30 years later. So the people that were identified as ones that avoided difficult issues actually were less happy and showed early signs of dementia much more than the group that were willing to take on the tough issues. So there's a cost to pay for running away. I think psychologically, when we run away from things, it makes us feel small, weak, vulnerable, intimidated. And it often is based on what the psychologists call a fixed mindset. You can only do what you can do, what skills you already have. The alternative is a growth mindset. It's a belief in yourself that you can learn to adapt to new situations. So even if you find yourself on the wrong road, the road that you never thought you would be on, you want to be in the driver's seat. You want to realize that you do have choices. They may not be the choices you want. They may not go as far as you want, but there are choices. And staying in that active, adaptive mindset is critically important. The alternative is to feel like a passive passenger, just along for the ride, kind of being driven and controlled by external circumstances. That's deadly. And people with that mindset, they don't live as long, and they tend to live less happy lives. It's so critical to maintain a sense of agency no matter what you're doing. Viktor Frankl, one of our heroes, a Holocaust camp survivor who began his professional career as a psychiatrist in Austria, he said from his experience in the camps that the final freedom is the ability to decide how you're going to see things, your attitude toward things, how you respond to things. And I think that's especially true as we approach the end of life. So, as Skip is saying, we're hoping that what you hear today will empower you. It will encourage you to really consider your options. There's a wonderful book by Katie Butler called The Art of Dying Well. And she talks about the whole dying process from a medical and psychological standpoint, but also emphasizes some of the choices you might not even think of. You know, where do you want to spend your final weeks and months? I have a family I've worked with. The husband is quickly dying of progressive cancer, but he wanted to get to Hawaii one last time. And by God, they got him in his wheelchair on the plane to Hawaii. And he couldn't go out on the beach, but he could see the beach from his hotel room or from the patio. And that meant a great deal to him. Katie Butler also talks about, you know, do you want to use some aromatherapy? Do you want to have a harpist? Who do you want to spend your time with at the last days of your life? But maintaining a sense that you do have choices. It's still your life. It really allows you to preserve a sense of your own integrity, your own identity, to as long as possible. So that's our hope for today. Some practical information about things like legal and financial matters. We're going to talk about a number of medical situations and services, and we're going to delve more deeply into the emotional and family issues that are so critically important toward the end. So let's see. You want to introduce our next speaker, Skip?
I forgot the most important announcement. The restrooms are in the back, past the stairs to the left. Okay, so that's the critical part. We're going to go back to our program because our speaker did show up, Megan Lederer, who I want to introduce to you. Megan is a gift to us. Her family has been members of this church forever. And so recently she's had to deal with some very difficult situations, and we would like to ask Megan if she would make a few opening remarks to kind of set the mood for it.
Hi, guys. I'm so sorry I was late. I'm going to chalk it up to grief brain, which is what my grief counselor has been chatting with me about. It's like when you're pregnant and you can't remember where you're going when you get in your car to drive places. I have been through a lot in the last 18 months or so. I've sort of become an accidental end-of-life expert. So it started with my mom and Dr. Andy Robinson, who's here, who you will meet. I guess it kind of goes back further. My dad was diagnosed with prostate cancer 28 years ago, I believe. And so he was connected with what was then palliative care, which ultimately became what they call supportive care, to have a little bit better connotation. And so my dad developed a really great relationship with Dr. Robinson. And then my mom was diagnosed with dementia probably another, 18 years after that. And at first, I think my brother who's here and I noticed changes before she really even recognized that she was forgetting things, but ultimately was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And so between the two of them, there were a lot of end-of-life conversations. My parents were weirdly obsessed with end-of-life conversations. We definitely had times where we'd be like, Mom, Dad, can we just not one time talk about dying, please? But now, having been through it with both of them, I'm so incredibly grateful to them for pushing us to have those conversations for many, many reasons. And I'm so pleased to see you all here and hope that this helps you think through the conversations you want to have with your own families and your children. Because I also have lost my husband in the last few months to malignant melanoma, and he was 49. And we had not had these conversations except around my parents. But thank goodness we had sort of opened that up a little bit. And I think it made it easier for Dr. Kennedy, who is also here, who was Dan's supportive care physician at the end of his life, for Dan to be able to at least express some of what he wanted at the end of his life. It all happened very quickly for him, unfortunately, so it's a little different. But I think having gone through this, I've seen 3 different sort of ways that this can happen. So my mom, because she had dementia, was limited in her options. And I'm assuming you want me to talk about all of this. Yeah? Okay. Yeah, so she chose to end her life using voluntary stopping of eating and drinking, which means that she essentially stopped eating and drinking with a lot of support from family and death doula and hospice and all kinds of amazing people. And it was very difficult. It takes a lot of will, and she had that in spades. And when she first told us about this, she was in actually quite good health. And I can remember the visit and sobbing uncontrollably through the entire thing. Because how could she ever think about leaving us? And it seemed like at that point it was such a distant future choice. And then, by God, she did it. We sort of thought maybe she forgot, but she didn't. And it was what she wanted, and she absolutely went the way she wanted to go, surrounded by the people she loved. She made a lot of decisions about who those people were and where she wanted to be, and all of that. So that was one way. My husband, Dan, it was a little bit more sudden. He was much younger. It was a much different decision process. He actually went through the process of getting medication for medical aid in dying. He met that qualification, but ended up never invoking his right to use it. So we had it at our house, but we never used it. I think it came, and then maybe 3 or 4 days later, he died. So we didn't have that. So he sort of went through this process in a more natural way. Although he was not at home, he ended up at the Denver Hospice Inpatient Center, which I'm happy to tell people about if they're interested. And then my dad, who really was sort of the glue, I think, that brings all of us together today, because he, I think, was meant to be speaking instead of me, also had a fairly rapid decline. He had stopped doing treatment for his prostate cancer about 18 months, 19 months before February. And he had tried some things to alleviate some symptoms, and one thing led to another, and he wasn't eating, and it just was very clear that the quality of his life was rapidly declining. The things he loved to do, he couldn't do anymore. One of them was eating. But, just being able to get up and about and be with the people he loved, he couldn't do. And so he also had used his medical aid in dying. And so my brothers and I got the privilege of being there while he made that choice. So I've seen 3 different things. I would say the medical aid in dying, as horrible as it might sound to someone not initiated in this, was the most peaceful. We got to say all the things we wanted to say. It was very controlled. It was beautiful. We told him how much we loved him, and then he was gone. And it was just how you imagine you would want it to be at the end of your life. So, I think, I hope in my dad's spirit, we can come together today to talk about these hard topics and help you guys think through your plans. Again, talk to your younger children if you have them, grandchildren if you have them, about starting to think about some of these things, because you just don't know. And thankfully, Dan and I had time to talk through a lot of things, but some families don't. And I think knowing what you wish is very helpful. And the last thing I'll say is I've also done 3 celebration of life services in this sanctuary. And it's sure helpful if you write down what you want it to look like. My parents were both very organized, and they told us exactly what music they wanted, what readings they wanted, who they wanted to speak, all those things. And it was so easy and wonderful and exactly how they pictured it. And of course, because Dan was only 49 and had not done this before, he didn't designate so many things. And it's a lot of work for the remaining family to try to figure out what those right choices are. I think we did a beautiful job of celebrating all 3 of them, but I would say too, that's another super, super helpful thing for your family. As grim as it may feel to talk about it, I think it was such a gift to us to sort of know just what our parents wanted. So, all right, thank you.
Thank you, Megan. That's a very brave person to be able to stand up and talk about all she's been through. Okay, we're going to jump into it. Our first speaker is James Farina, who is with a law firm, Hutchins and Associates. He is a newly minted associate for them, and congratulations. And he's going to talk to us about some of the legal aspects that you need to be considering.
Thank you all for having me. Skip and closer. Can you hear me? Thanks. Larry and Skip didn't tell me I was going first, and they told me to wear a suit. So this is my portion of this discussion is a much more intensely practical piece. A lot of people don't really understand what estate planning is, what probate is, and there's a lot of confusion about whether or not they even need a will or what a will might look like and what it does. And so I'm going to talk pretty broadly today about estate planning, what you should be thinking about. We're going to take a little look at the probate process and some of the other documents that comprise a fully complete estate plan, because it's not just a will, but there are other ancillary documents that can be just as important. I'm not sure if my slides are up. So one of the primary considerations we look at when we're talking with people about making an estate plan is what kind of assets they have, how do they own those assets, and what happens to those assets after they pass away. An estate plan is really a memorialization of your testamentary intent. That's a fancy word for what you wish to happen to your assets once you pass away. So when we understand what types of assets you have, then we can understand how to dispose of them effectively. So many people, they own a property, their house is their primary asset, and they may own that with a spouse as tenants in common or in joint tenancy. And if it's held in joint tenancy, for example, then the house will pass to the survivor of the two of them immediately upon the first spouse's death. And you don't need to, no, that makes probate unnecessary. That's one of the vehicles that we use to ensure that assets pass down from you to whoever it is that you wish your assets to pass. Another way is via beneficiary designation. Other kinds of assets that many people have are bank accounts or life insurance, and a beneficiary designation can automatically designate how that asset should pass without having to go through the probate process. So those are all tools that we use in our toolbox for estate planning. You can go to the slide, please. So the probate process, what is that? So the probate process is just the legal process through the courts to appoint a personal representative for your estate to administer the assets that have fallen into your estate. So if you have a bank account that goes by beneficiary designation, that won't fall into your estate, but there inevitably are other assets that will, such as a car, maybe an interest in a house or some other assets, your personal property in your house, that will go into your estate, and your personal representative will be in charge of administering the estate, collecting all of those assets, and distributing them to those that it should be distributed to, as your will states. They'll also be in charge of doing a final tax return because the IRS always has to be paid, and then they will close your estate, and the probate process will be complete. Go to the next slide, please. So, how do we achieve these things? Many people have heard of a trust, and most people have heard about what a will is. The will is the primary vehicle through which we dispose of people's assets. It states who should receive your property and in what types of percentages. Many people understand a trust as something that only maybe the 1% would use. Millionaires have a trust for, charitable giving. But a trust is a vehicle that we use to ensure that your assets are retained and effectively distributed to your beneficiaries. So, for example, you might have young children, you might have a family member who has special needs. A trust is like a vehicle that can hold those assets for the benefit of a young person until they've turned a certain age, and then they can have those assets transferred over to them. It could be also used as to supplement the needs for someone who has a disability or has special needs, and you'd want them to receive the assets of the trust slowly over time so that they can be cared for. So these are all tools that we tailor to your particular situation based on your specific assets to ensure that your desires are as effectively carried out as possible. And that is the estate planning process. You can go to the next slide, please. And we can discuss all of these details in the small groups as well afterwards. So please think about some questions you've got. I alluded to some of the other pieces of the estate plan. So medical directives, a living will, and medical powers of attorney. These are also documents that are very important in the estate planning process. It's not just about your will and how to dispose of your assets, but a medical advance directive can give guidance to your agents to make medical decisions for you in a situation where you can't make those decisions for yourself, either because you cannot communicate or you're incapacitated in hospital. And it's a great guide for your loved ones to understand what your medical decision-making desires are. So that is a very important component of the estate planning process. You can go to the next slide, please. The final pieces are those powers of attorney, which can direct how, designate an agent to act for you, to make financial decisions if you're unable to do so, or to make medical decisions if you're unable to do so. They can ensure that bills are paid and medical decisions are made should you be unable to do so. Guardianships and conservatorships, I'll just touch on those briefly. A will can designate who you might like to act as your guardian or conservator if you're incapacitated in some way or you become too elderly to manage your own affairs. And so your will can direct and name somebody to take that position so that they can take care of you if you're unable to do so. So all of these documents are designed to ensure that you can have your wishes carried out and that your loved ones can understand how you would have liked that to happen. I think there's one more slide. That's it. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Larry Ricketts, who's going to talk about the financial.
Thank you, Skip. I'm Larry Ricketts. I'm a member of this church and also of the men's group in the church. And James has given you the legal estate planning aspects of passing assets. I'm just going to quickly, and I'll be available for questions at the table. Bob Lederer dubbed me as a financial doula because when everybody is in crisis or they need it, because I was a commercial banker, a private banker, an investment banker, people think you can solve the problems that should have been solved during your whole life. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the financial preparation, and it requires simplicity, requires organization, discipline, and finally requires a little bit of good advice from either a financial planner, a banker, a credit union person, a CPA. What we find, it's not too hard to find an advice giver. But those first three things, simplicity, organization, and discipline, the clutter of our lives and the busyness of a material world seem to stand in the way of those first three aspects of good financial planning. Let me give you examples if you go to the beginning of the next slide, I think. Credit cards. We have too many. Everybody got airline miles, and I got about 1 million of them. You don't know what you're doing. My advice is simplify. Just have a few, and then make sure that one of the credit cards is the name of your partner, and they've applied for it, and the other one's in your name. If you have a card that has 2 names on it, you think it's joint, there are not too many credit cards that are joint. So I've had very wealthy people have passed away where only the husband has the credit card in their name. They say, well, I can't use the credit card. They've cut me off. So that's one simplicity. Bank accounts. It's much better to have simple, a few bank accounts. Joint bank accounts, the best way, but if you don't have a joint bank account, you want to have a beneficiary, as James said. That way you don't have to go through the trouble of probate. IRA account, same thing. Simplify. Put your IRAs together or your 401k together and make sure you call whoever's managing them and you have a beneficiary. Automobiles was mentioned as going through probate. I did not know this in preparation for this. If not in joint tenancy in Colorado, there's a form, DR 2009, that you can fill out, have the person who owns the car fill out a beneficiary, get it notarized, keep it in your house. Somebody passes away, you simply take that with a death certificate, and the automobile immediately transfers. We have a lot of friends that have had more nightmares in simple things like cars transfers. Next slide. Especially concerning in today's world, in the digital world, passwords. We all have 1 million passwords and they control so many things. You need to keep a list of your passwords, and if they change, you need to keep them. James and I were just talking about the Apple phone, that so many people think that they've got their passwords in the phone. If you don't know the code to get into the Apple phone, Apple does not let you in it. And you have to go through a court order, and even then, James tells me Apple fights you for the exact wording of the court order for privacy purposes. So make sure you have a list of the passwords somewhere and keep it so the family knows, executor knows. Finally, automatic payments. Everybody has automatic debits. My advice is make sure the automatic payments only go to one account, either one credit card or one banking account. That way it's very easy for the executor or the next of kin to know what's going on and what they have to stop and what they have to continue. Finally, there's great helps today that I can show you when we go around. There's true organization aids. You can Google anything. Your attorney might give you one. James is saying they're working on one at Hutchings, where it's a checklist and all the things you ought to keep for your executor. Well, there's also a free one I'll show you. Believe it or not, the Australian government still thinks their role is to help people. And there's a free checklist and a free complete guide that you can follow that will help you. But then, typical of our world, there's a new product called Next of Kin Box, Knockbox, that you see advertised on television and others. I have one. I like the Knockbox. It costs about $120 because it leads you through with exact instructions. They wire you or email you once a week to make sure you're keeping the discipline of doing it. And also, it gives instructions on the back of each page of what an executor should do or what one of your kin should do. Thank you.
I realize we're throwing a lot at you. It can seem pretty overwhelming. You have two options to deepen your knowledge, to fill in some of the gaps. In the small groups, you'll be able to ask our legal and financial experts and others for more details. Also, on the very last slide, you'll see in just a few minutes, I'm leaving my email address. If you would like a copy of our slide deck that has a lot of this information, I'm glad to send that out to you. So that's another chance to fill in some of the gaps. Our next speakers will talk to us about the discipline of palliative care, which, as Megan already said, is sometimes being called supportive care these days. We have two speakers who will speak to us in just a minute, Laura Kennedy and Andy Robinson. Both of them, I believe, are with Kaiser Permanente, Colorado. Bob repeatedly expressed his gratitude for the palliative care people that he and Marlene had worked with. Also in the small groups who will be rotating with them, Miles Corkern, who also is a palliative care physician. So, y'all want to come up?
Hello. Since our time is somewhat limited, Andy and I spoke and decided that I would just speak for us, but we'll both be present in the groups for any questions that might be asked. I think there are a couple things that I want to talk about and then just share a brief patient story to illustrate some of what palliative or supportive care can offer. Palliative care is a specialty of medicine that works to relieve suffering in serious illness. It's appropriate to be provided at any stage of that serious illness. And part of the reason that we changed the wording in Kaiser and in some other places from palliative to supportive care is because so many people think palliative care is the same as hospice. And that makes it scary because hospice is about end of life. And we want to make sure that people are able to access the support of a palliative or supportive care team much before they're actually at the end of life. So relieving suffering in the setting of serious illness can take a couple of different ways. This is done in multidisciplinary teams consisting of doctors, nurses, social workers, and chaplains. that really try to wrap around a person and the people who care for them to address a variety of different needs. That can look like managing symptoms related to the serious illness or to the treatments of the illness. That can include emotional and coping support, because we know that when somebody is living with a serious illness, it causes a lot of difficult emotions. It can really impact somebody's sense of agency, somebody's sense of self and identity, and the roles that they have in their family and their community. And so that's part of the role of the social worker, is to, help people process and work through some of those challenging emotions and identity changes that come with illness. We know that people also need to do some future planning in the setting of serious illness. That might look like completing advanced directives, things like James mentioned with the medical durable power of attorney. I want to give a brief plug here. Colorado is not a next of kin state for medical durable power of attorney. It does not automatically go to your spouse or your adult children. It's very simple to complete a medical durable power of attorney form. Everybody over the age of 18 should complete one. Please do. That is, in my personal opinion, the most important advanced directive for anybody to complete. But then you also need to tell people what you want. What are your wishes? And I think what's most important is, what quality of life do you need to have for life to be worth fighting for still? What do you need to be able to do? And what level of cognitive function do you need to retain in order for life to still feel meaningful and have the potential for joy? Those are the conversations that can help your family work with healthcare teams to make decisions about what medical treatments then would help you, and what medical treatments, instead of helping you, would just land you in a situation that might feel worse than death. So the medical power of attorney, and then completing those conversations about what is that minimum acceptable quality of life, are really valuable things to complete as part of that future planning. And those are also conversations that any palliative care team can help support. The other thing that a palliative care team does is help people navigate complex medical decisions. We know when somebody has a serious illness, especially if it's something that can't be cured, that it's not always as simple as you do this next thing without even thinking about it. That people sometimes have to make difficult choices about what trade-offs are acceptable. What symptoms or side effects are they willing to tolerate? How much time in the hospital are they willing to accept? How important is fighting for more time when weighed against these other priorities? And those conversations about complex medical decisions is the core of what palliative care is. The goal of a palliative care team is always to make sure that somebody has the agency and the support to be empowered to have as much control in a situation that can feel very out of control as possible. So just a brief patient story, because I think all of that is very abstract. And I wanted to try to paint a picture for you a little bit. One of the first patients who I helped take care of after I completed my fellowship in palliative medicine, I'm gonna call her Chris. She came to me in the clinic and she was furious. I have no idea actually why she kept the appointment with me, because she was mad at every doctor who had ever lived. And she was furious with the medical system because they had failed her. She had been diagnosed with a cancer that she was told was curable. She had endured invasive and painful treatment with the intent of curing this cancer. And just a few months later, she was told that the cancer had spread, that the treatments had not worked, and that she now had incurable cancer, in spite of everything that she had been subjected to. She was beside herself with rage, and she was directing a lot of it at me and at the social worker who was part of that visit with me. But we stuck with her, and we spent time building trust, helping absorb some of that anger for her, and she agreed to make a follow-up visit. Over time, we worked at helping her process some of her emotions and were able to help peel back that anger and help her confront the grief and the fear that were behind it. She worked with that social worker to continue finding ways to manage and process those emotions. I worked with her on managing the pain that came with that tumor in her liver and the nausea and nerve pain that came with the chemotherapy that she was on. She had a great response. She actually had surgery to remove that one tumor in her liver and had a period of several years where she was cancer-free. She knew it was coming back, that she wasn't cured. But we went from seeing each other, maybe once a month to seeing each other infrequently, maybe every 6 months, and working on just the nerve pain and also some of the difficulty of how do you live with this cloud hanging over you, knowing what's going to kill you, but not knowing when. How do you continue to live a life filled with meaning and joy in the face of that? Recently, she had a recurrence. She's now got cancer in her lung, and she came to me because she'd heard about the options from her other doctors, and she wasn't sure what to do. They had recommended a biopsy of the lung. She was worried about that. She didn't want to undergo systemic treatment, immune therapy, which is what she would need. And she was really wrestling with how to approach this. And she came to me because she said, Dr. Kennedy, I trust you. You have been with me through all of this, and I really value your input in thinking through this decision. So we sat down and talked about what's most important to her. We talked about, how she considers those trade-offs at this point. And I helped advocate with the other doctors for the treatment course that made sense for her, given those goals and priorities. So at some point, her cancer will cause her death. I think she's still some ways off from that at this point, but it's closer than it was before. But she knows that she has the support of a team who has gotten to know her over the course of her illness, isn't just sweeping in at the end to get her enrolled in hospice care. And she's got such a greater sense of her own agency in her medical treatment as a result. It's been a real privilege to help take care of her. And I hope that her story can help illustrate a little bit of what a palliative care team can do for somebody over time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That was very moving. Our next speaker will be Sarah Marsh. She is going to talk to us about hospice services. I must say I've had the good fortune to be the doctor for several hospice nurses. And as they described their work to me, I more and more thought of them as angels of mercy. To come into a situation of a dying patient and family, sometimes in an uproar, confused, very conflicted, and to try to sort out things, manage the illness, manage the pain, manage the complicated psychology going on. It's an extraordinary job. So, Sarah.
Good afternoon. As a chaplain for over a decade, I've had the privilege of sitting with hundreds of people in their final days, listening to their stories, talking through big questions, and sharing a lot of quiet moments and unexpected laughs. It's really meaningful work, and it's different every time. But the one thing I've noticed that comes up again and again is that there are a lot of misconceptions about hospice. And so today I just want to clear up a few of those misconceptions and share how hospice can really offer comfort and support in people's last days. So the first misconception is that sometimes people think hospice means a person only has days left to live. Hospice care is available to individuals who have a life-limiting illness, and under Medicare guidelines, this means a physician believes that if the illness follows its course, a person has about 6 months or less to live. Of course, everyone's journey is different, and sometimes people can live longer or shorter. That focus of hospice is really going to be on providing comfort and dignity and supporting just this really sacred time with patients and families. The second misconception is that hospice is really expensive, and I really understand that. People wonder how much it's going to cost or what the cost is, and that's not something you want to worry about during such a really tender time. The good news is that hospice care is usually very well supported by Medicare Part A, also some VA benefits, and private insurances will also help cover the costs of hospice. And there's a lot of help available to walk families through what's covered, so they're not left figuring it out on their own. A third misconception is that hospice is going to hasten someone's death. And really, I just want to emphasize that hospice is about providing support and care for individuals facing the end of life, ensuring that they have the highest quality of life possible until their last day. It allows patients to receive compassionate care tailored to their needs, focusing on comfort rather than curative treatment. Hospice focuses on whole person care, and it's a comprehensive support team that includes medical, emotional, and spiritual care. It's really personalized to the needs and the wishes of the patient. A hospice team has several healthcare professionals. There's a doctor, nurses, CNAs, social workers, and chaplains. And we work really collaboratively together just to manage symptoms and provide comfort and dignity. The goal is not to hasten or delay death, but to really ensure that a patient's final months are spent in accordance with their values and their preferences. Another misconception is that hospice is only for the bedridden, and hospice goes to where the patients call their home. So whether it be their own home, an assisted living, or a long-term care facility, people admit to hospice at all different stages of their journey. And so some patients admit and they're still working and doing a lot of activities, and some admit to hospice, they are confined to their bed, but that's just because of their disease progression. Another misconception about hospice is that it ends when a patient dies. And it's a really beautiful service that we can offer 13 months of bereavement to families after a patient dies. And that's just a really beautiful opportunity to help families cope with their loved one's loss, and also just kind of remind them that their loved one had a really good end-of-life experience and died a peaceful and dignified death. And then lastly, I just want to address, sometimes what I hear is that hospice means a person has given up hope. And I want to offer that death is a part of life, and dying is a spiritual and meaningful part of life, and it's not a medical failure, and it doesn't mean someone has given up hope. Sometimes people are often fearful that by saying yes to hospice, they feel it means that they're done and that they've given up. Culturally, I think hope is associated with fixing and striving and fighting, and there's a misconception that if we surrender, we're failing ourselves, we're failing others, and we're failing God. And I want to offer an opportunity to reframe hospice and hope. When we think of Father Henry Nouwen, I think about his message that he says, hope means to keep humming in the darkness, a quiet, steady presence, even when the outcome is uncertain. Author Parker Palmer takes us a step further, and he suggests that hope isn't about predicting the future, but about the way we choose to be in the world, even when faced with difficult realities. This understanding of hope reshapes how we might view hospice. For many, hospice can feel like an end to hope and a place where life's final moments are just merely waiting for death. But in reality, hospice serves as a deeper container for hope. It's not that a hope that death won't come, but it's a hope that death will come peacefully. In the hospice setting, at the end of life, people often reconcile with loved ones, they share life stories, they share wisdom, and they bless others. And this is really sacred work, filled with hope, not for a longer life, but a good death. And in hospice, we don't turn from life, we turn toward the life within death, the sacred within suffering, the hope that carries us not away from death, but through it with love. Thank you, guys.
I talked earlier about a baseball player, and the first string, unfortunately, for our death doula was not able to come. Marty Steiger, who's really been wonderful in a series of communications with us, unfortunately is working with a patient and family that is going through the final transition just this morning. So she called just a couple hours ago and said she could not be here. So I'm coming off the bench to try to give you some sense about what death doulas do. So all right. So death doula, also known as an end of life doula or death midwife, is a non-medical support professional who provides holistic care to individuals facing death and their loved ones. They offer emotional, physical, and spiritual support, guiding individuals through the dying process and helping families cope in grief. Many of you may be more familiar with birth doulas who do a lot of the same things during the birthing process. So Dr. Megan Lederer has already talked a little bit about two of the options that have become available in the last few years. One is, do we have the next slide there? Voluntarily stopping eating and drinking, so-called VSED. People struggle with the unrelieved suffering of chronic or incurable and progressive disorder are mentally capable individuals. They may decide to control their own dying by making a conscious decision to refuse foods and fluids of any kind, including artificial nutrition and or hydration, in order to advance the time of the death. This is the process. I've known two close friends who've been through this process in the last couple years. It did take a little over a week for both of them, but it was remarkably peaceful. Each of them had just a moment where they were craving food or water, but they were reminded of the plan. One of them had even made a videotape to remind himself, and they got some medicines to help them manage their anxiety, and the process really went quite smoothly. For both this and the MAID that I'm going to talk about in just a moment, it is a requirement that you are compos mentis, that you are competent to make this decision. So for Megan's mother in particular, Marlene, she had been through a very painful process with her own father, who went through many, many years of dementia. And it's a complicated process. We're going to hear some more about this from our ministers. But she decided she did not want to put her children through a process like that and spend years in a state where she could not enjoy her life, but she made theirs miserable. So these are very individual decisions. There's a lot of ethical and religious dimensions to this decision-making process. But to invoke either the voluntarily stopping eating and drinking process or the next one, next slide, the medical aid in dying, a person needs to be competent and to do what needs to be done themselves. They cannot have anyone else prevent them from eating or drinking, or in the case of MAID, taking the lethal overdose. They have to be able to do that themselves. So 2016, Colorado voters approved a law entitled Access to Medical Aid in Dying that, number one, allows an eligible terminally ill individual with a prognosis of 6 months or less to live, to request and self-administer, again, on their own, aid in dying medication in order to voluntarily end his or her life. 2, authorize a licensed medical professional to prescribe a lethal dose of a sedating medication to a terminally ill individuals under certain conditions. And again, the medicines are designed to calm the person and relieve them of both physical suffering and psychological suffering. And finally, 3, create criminal penalties for tampering with a person's request for medical aid in dying, medication, or knowingly coerce a person with a terminal illness to request the medication. Next slide. The final thing we asked poor Marty to do was talk about the disposition of remains. So it's a grim notion, but it's a job that needs to be done, is what to do with the body. So obviously there are a number of options here. Burial, traditional burial with a casket. 2, a green burial without embalming fluids in bodies in biodegradable container. 3, cremation, traditional use of flames to reduce a body to ashes. Aquamation, using water, heat, and an alkaline solution to reduce a body to ashes. And a new option available in several states, composting body, transforms it into soil using biodegradable materials so that it can be rapidly integrated into the earth and the plant life around it. Finally, one can also donate a body to, say, a medical center for scientific research or for medical purposes. So that's all part of the picture. Let's see, are our ministers here for our final panel? Let's see, Lorraine and Larissa and Phil.
Well, we're going to make our ministers speak as quickly as they can. We're running a few minutes late, but we do want to give an opportunity to hear a little bit, if you will, from our religious leaders. Phil is Campbell, the Most Reverend Phil Campbell, has been a minister here at this church for many years and also a church of mine in Boulder for a long time. Larissa Romero is our new minister here, and we're so happy to have her here and be part of this session today. And then the last person I want to introduce is not from our church, but she is with the Montview, I get the titles right here, Montview Boulevard Presbyterian Church. And it's Lorraine Leist, and I'm trying to bring it up. I'm not used to using my phone for these things here, but let me try this. Sorry. Lorraine is the associate pastor for congregational care and older adults. Prior to being at Montview, Lorraine served as a palliative care chaplain at Swedish Medical Center in Seattle. She is an ordained minister of the UCC and an advanced board certified chaplain with the Association of Professional Chaplains. And we're very pleased to have you here with us today as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to ask questions, and each of the panel members will have an opportunity to respond to those questions. And I think we'll go for about 10 or 12 more minutes, and then we'll be ready to break into our discussion groups.
Well, just to help kind of structure things a little bit, we thought we'd winnow the questions down to 3. Number 1, does religious faith change at the end of life? And when you think about the people you've been with in that situation, what were their greatest fears and what gave them the greatest comfort?
Can be a benefit, can be helpful, and that same faith in death can be a challenge. And it can sort of fail people. And one example is a Catholic patient, for example, who has children and grandchildren who do not practice the faith, may find themselves challenged and fearful of dying because their loved ones, they won't see their loved ones again in heaven. So that is, I guess, an example of faith failing in death.
Yeah. I suppose in terms of folks' faith lives, the religious landscape has so much to do with acknowledging that death is a part of life. We heard Viktor Frankl earlier, how much meaning making gets done in relationship to understanding that we all are beings towards death. And one of my favorite lines from any play is from A Lion in Winter, when one brother says to the other, you fool, what does it matter how we fall? And the brother says in response, when all there is the fall, it matters very much. And to be a part of the religious landscape is to acknowledge that we're all moving towards the fall in some way. And so how you start entering into that landscape likewise depends on how you've had a relationship with it thus far in your life, and it can change depending on the kind of meaning making that you're ready to do at that point or not. And it's very open in that way, and you see the whole spectrum of it as a result, I think.
I think my experience is that it's enormously varied and complex. And it's not just about the person at the end of death, but also their, if they are fortunate enough to have a family system or those close to them, and how various individuals respond differently. And so one of the experiences I've encountered is a kind of weariness that accompanies some who've often lived a long life, and they know that they're ready because they're tired. And so even huge existential questions or big sort of definitive and right answer religious questions don't seem as important because they're just tired. And they're enjoying just being with people at the end. But on the other hand, I've seen with people, and perhaps even more so with some family members and not others, the raising anew the specters of somebody didn't pray hard enough. And so then there's this questioning of faith that can accompany. So, so part of it is the invitation of a conference like this to have these conversations early, not when you think you're actively dying. But, we all know how it's going to end. None of us know when, or some of us have a better idea than others, but one of my favorite book titles, and that kind of shapes the way I approach things, there's a lot of literature about this, but my favorite book titles is Talking About Death Won't Kill You. And so I think that's that invitation, so that it's not just what happens at the end, but what kind of conversation have you had in your religious community as well as with your significant others, all through life.
Thank you all so much. The second question is, especially when we're thinking about procedures like BSED and MAID, where the death itself is hastened, is that a sin? And also, do you want to say something about the family dynamics around those kind of discussions that patients do or do not have with their immediate family?
I'm happy to start that one again. I think if we think about sin as a turning away from God, which is one way of thinking about what sin is, what does it mean to turn toward God in the setting of end of life? And if we think about turning toward a God of compassion, a God of mercy, then God's capacity for compassion and mercy is wide and big and great enough to accept the idea that intractable suffering, intractable pain is not is something that someone would choose not to embrace. So I think when my setting for this really has to do with compassion, grace, and mercy.
Sin is such a loaded word, particularly today in our cultural context where it is too often our spiritual understandings are used punitively. We bludgeon one another with them, and that's really not their intent, right? And so to kind of reframe first the understanding of sin away from the punitive, as Reverend Lorraine was saying, and getting us to a place of thinking about it more as a space of invitation for growth, a space of the understanding that if we're thinking about things in terms of failure, turning away, missing the mark is another common translation for sin. What does that mean in the context of a life well lived, right? And the way in which you die well too. What makes dying well a success? And if that is to bring in the family dynamics, if that is to have had a really beautiful conversation with your family, to be together and on the same page, to be honoring with respect what those who are dying need, that seems like a success to me, and I would venture to say to God as well, because I think what God desires for us is a life full of freedom of choice and dignity. So.
Well, my answer is no. But having said that, that the question might be asked needs to be respected and attended to, and to hear what's behind the question and the fears and the concerns. And I've come. So about a decade ago, I described a year as it was my year of living surgically, or the year I didn't die, and. But it's really shaped my approach to this, which is the idea that somehow, and you didn't use this phrase, but I hear it this way sometimes, we're playing God in making these decisions of hastening death. It seems to me is we don't question it when we have a prolonged life. And yet it's really the same kind of human agency that's engaged in life-saving measures that I know a generation, I would not be here if we were having this conversation a generation ago, because there were not the human capacities to do the kinds of surgeries that have now prolonged my life. And so I think to put it in that context and to try to invite that sort of practical, if you will, understanding that. And yet I also theologically, I would claim there's a phrase in the Statement of Faith of the United Church of Canada, in life and in death and in life beyond death, we are not alone. God is with us. And so life and death are part of the processes of existence and living, if you will. And so I would want to invite that kind of assurance that in all things, God is with us, we are with each other, there's presence of love, and to approach these decisions in that frame rather than the either or of good, bad, right, wrong.
Thank you all so much. You've done such a wonderful job covering so many different dimensions of this. I'm going to just skip our third question. Let's go to our small groups. And Skip, do you want to get us organized for that? And you'll have a chance to again talk to everyone, including our three ministers in this next round.
All right, this could be a logistics nightmare. What I'd like to do is to have you help us do a circle of 10 chairs here, 10 chairs just behind that, 10 chairs over here, and 10 chairs behind that. So it'll be a circle. We won't have a table. And then it doesn't make any difference which circle you sit in, because we're going to move our speakers around every 15 minutes. We'll start over at this corner, though, with the legal and financial. Then we'll do the palliative care and the hospice in that circle. Then over here, we will have, actually, we're going to invite, if we could, Megan and Ben to be at and Steve at the death doula and table. And then finally, the ministers will be at the far table over here. Okay, I'm only going to give you 3 minutes to do this. Let's see if you can do it.